Imagine, demand, and build a world transformed.
And our founding editor is here with us today, Hilary Wainwright. We do a quarterly magazine, and we have a website. Our website has no unethical advertising. We've got a very strict policy around that. It's free, there's no paywall. We put all the content that we produce up online, and we're completely reliant on subscriptions and donations to keep going. So we encourage you to join us and subscribe to us, but we also encourage you to submit your ideas to us, and that's why we're really here today to talk a little bit about the nuts and bolts of the pitching process, but to give you a little bit of a taste of the red pepper approach to things. So that's enough really about me. I'm just going to pass on very briefly to some of my fellow editors to introduce themselves. So Hilary, would you like to kick us off? You have to unmute yourself first, I think.
I haven't got such a beautifully curated background, but anyway, I'm really happy to be here. And my Wi-Fi is a bit unstable because it's just a dongle. And so, I don't know, I'm here really to talk particularly from the angle of a sort of occasionally successful, but often not successful writer. So the experience of pitching, including, I mean, to Red Pepper, but also to The Guardian and one or two other places. And also just maybe something about the origins of Red Pepper, because 25 years, it is a long time, and people never believed when we began. People just said, you know, the left, there cannot be another left. Well, there weren't hardly any anyway, but just saying, you know, left magazines do not survive, you know, and it's true that, you know, the New Statesman and the Morning Star, for example, I sound a bit jealous, and I am. I mean, they get masses of money from trade unions, and you know, and have a kind of subsidy like that, and we don't. Yeah, I mean, obviously we want to try and get it, but we do rely completely on subscriptions, which keeps us honest and accountable, but it does make us very needy. And so Charlotte here, Charlotte Austin, who's there, she'll wave maybe. And she's particularly responsible for increasing our subscriptions. So please, as well as pitching and being part of our community, think of yourselves as promoting and helping us to grow materially, because, you know, being kind of Marxist influence, we know that we need material, you know, a material base in order to thrive. So on the pitching, I mean, I think
Hilary, what, can you let's wait a second and let Amar and Anya just introduce themselves.
Yes. Okay.
Thank you. So Ananya or Amar, would you like to say hello?
Hi, I'm Ananya. I'm just joined the editorial collective this earlier this year, and I'm also before that and still am a freelance writer as well and journalist. So yeah, I have a lot of experience in pitching to a lot of places, quite often unsuccessfully, but yeah, can definitely talk about that as well.
Yeah, hi, I'm Amar. Lovely to be here. Like Ananya, I'm a relatively new member of the editorial collective, and I've been a freelance journalist for a while, so in this, as in all aspects of my life, I've got a lot of experience in talking about rejection, so that's kind of what I'm here to chat about, but also about, you know, what the responsibilities of left-wing journalists and left-wing media really should be, because my background is in trade union organising and stuff like that as well. But yeah, just here to help out, really.
Great, thank you so much, everyone. So just to let all our participants know a little bit about how the session is going to run, we're going to be turning over the meat of it to you, actually, because we want to talk a little bit about pitching as a process, and so not looking at pitching as a stepping stone to getting your work published, but as part and parcel of the writing process. A lot of times as an editor, you receive basically full articles that someone's just kind of handing to you and saying, you know, here's what I wrote, will you publish it? And we want to encourage people to think about a different way of working that's more collaborative and more about making your work as a writer the best work it can be. I'm not really, I'm an occasional journalist. I write a lot for Red Pepper, but I'm more of an editor. That's how I see my role. In my other time, I'm an academic, and so I spend a lot of time writing there. And I think one thing that's useful to think about is what is a pitch? What does it do? Yes, it unlocks the kind of door to getting your work published by an outlet. But if we take a step back and say, well, what does it actually contain and what does it do? You can think of it like a description or an abstract if you work in an academic sphere, or even the stand first. So in journalism, the stand first is the little bit that's kind of between the headline or the title of a piece and between the body of the text. You'll get a little, maybe a line or two, sometimes longer, but usually literally only one sentence telling you what the content is about. So it adds something to the headline. And a pitch is kind of doing a similar task. You're telling an editor what your piece is about, right? And hopefully you're encouraging your editor to give you feedback on that and to work with you to make a great piece. So that should give you a little bit of an idea about when you should be starting to write a pitch and when you should be thinking about pitching. I discourage you from sitting down and writing a whole piece and then trying to shop it around, even though that's the most tempting thing to do quite often. So you want to think a little bit about, okay, I've got an idea for something. What directions do I want to take this idea in? Where could it sit? Where could it be published? And once you've started fleshing out your article idea, or maybe your essay idea, maybe your investigative journalism piece, once you've started fleshing that out a little bit, then you can start to make a pitch. As an editor, I'm going to give you the kind of, not the do's and don'ts, but to give you a little bit of a perspective into why we're encouraging people to pitch in a particular way. So as an editor, I have my submissions inbox, and that is usually overflowing with people who are sending press releases, or kind of speculative interests, like I'm a writer, can I write for you? Which is great, but it's not really what I'm looking for as an editor. That's not my role within the organisation, or at least not through that pathway. We also get a lot of attachments of documents that are just kind of thousands of words long that are quite like time intensive to read. Sometimes they don't even have any guidance about what that is. And so as an editor with not very much time, you've got to think about what that, how much time can I spend doing this? And a lot of time you'll see the submissions guidelines on outlets saying, we just won't read these. And I think that's something to take very seriously. And kind of my biggest takeaway would be to really discourage you from just sending whole articles out there. As a proactive editor, so as someone I'm commissioning pieces, if I contact writers, I also ask them to pitch me ideas. So I'll contact them and say, hey, we're at Red Pepper, we're working on the culture section is going to be all about comedy. And I love your work, but we'd particularly be interested in your analysis of how coronavirus has impacted the industry. Would you be interested in this? And tell me a little bit about what you'd want to say. And so you're inviting a pitch back to kind of kickstart that conversation. So even as an editor who's commissioning, we're kickstarting that conversation. Okay, that's a lot of information to throw at you. So I'm going to go through the nuts and bolts very quickly with a classic PowerPoint. Okay, so pitching tips. Let's start with the where. You want to choose the best fit for your piece. So get familiar with publications, look at what they've published on the same topic, use that search function. Another thing to ask at this time is, what's their paying rate? Do they pay, and how much do they pay? And there's a reality of being a freelance journalist in particular, is that is an increasingly important question to consider when you're ranking your kind of, where's your ideal first choice outlets publish. You want to look at fit and who you want to work with, whose company you want to be in. Will they be interested in the piece? There's something about payment is important there as well. You always want to personalize your pitch. So tell the outlet that you know something about them, right? Is your piece complementary to something that they've recently published, or does it add a different perspective? What to include? always, always, always look at the outlet-specific submission guidelines. Sometimes they're quite hard to find, but I encourage you to spend a few extra minutes searching on that website to see what they say. Sometimes they are very specific, and they'll give you an idea about how long you should wait to expect to hear back from people. Jacobin is an interesting case because they actively do encourage people to submit 2,000 word essays as a starting point, whereas many UK-based outlets just don't do that. They actively discourage it. So have a good look at the specific submission guidelines. Always say a little bit about who you are, link to your social media profile or portfolio of your previous work, and let them know why you're the best person to write this article. Use a clear, concise subject line. You know, you're competing with a lot of other different pieces in an inbox. So say pitch, opinion, or investigative piece, or photo essay, whatever it is, make that nice and clear and tell them what the subject is. And of course, you want to include the body of your pitch, which is what the article is about. Who to contact? I encourage you to find the relevant editor wherever possible. A lot of places have general inboxes, and that's fine. But if you do send it there, you want to use a very, very, very clear subject line, because you're going to be competing with even more content that's jostling for attention. You can find out editors' interest via social media if it's not on the website. So when this is something that often is overlooked, journalists struggle with deadlines a lot. And you want to be realistic about your time frame. If you've got a piece that needs to go out this week, say so. If it really needs to go out tomorrow, say so. Tell them that you need a quick response because it's so time sensitive, and you need to be able to move on if they're not interested as much as get it out there. On the flip side of that is assess your time frame. If you're suggesting doing an investigative piece that you've already started, but you need to place somewhere before continuing that work, then let them know whereabouts in the process you are and how much more work needs to be done, and be realistic about that. Any follow-up should be very, very brief. Just say, you know, in case you missed it, can you let me know? I wouldn't say more than that, because editors will get back to you if they are interested. And ultimately, be polite, friendly, concise, proofread and double check all your links. I think I will stop. Actually, no, I'll share one more piece. So this is an example of a pitch. So this is a pitch for a piece that I wrote for Red Pepper, and this is what the pitch would look like. Obviously, I don't want to share pitches that I've received without kind of the permission of people, so this is a version of it. You want to be nice and clear at the front. You can see overall it's pretty short. I've italicized the main crux of it. So the surrounding information you've got at the top and bottom, who I am, how long the article is, what state it's ready in. Is it like near completion, or is it still a bit to go? It's timely, so please let me know if it's of interest to you. And just very kind of short and to the point. There's no attachment to this piece. That's a key point, right? There's no attachment. And how does this end up? Well, this ended up as this article. And you can see here, this is the stand first, the bit in between the headline and the image. And that's kind of a condensed version of the pitch. So that's my perspective as an editor. And I'm going to pass over to Hilary to talk a little bit about her perspective and experiences as someone who has been pitching, and then we'll invite Amar and Ananya in to join that conversation as well.
Okay, so thanks, Siobhan, and everything Siobhan said is absolutely, you know, perfect from my experience. So I'll just say a bit more about the kind of what works and what doesn't work, because I've had experience of both. Like Amar, I've been rejected lots of times, and so I think one thing that's important is what Siobhan mentioned, is like get to know the paper. I mean, you'll have work out what you're trying to do, and then work out which newspaper, which publication is most appropriate. And then I think always assume a kind of stance of modesty. Never assume that publication is interested in you. You know, even if you're kind of quite well known in a particular sphere, you know, they're not interested in you per se. So So don't don't approach them in a kind of confident way. I mean, well, I suppose be confident, but not like overconfident. Be sort of a bit modest. I think the other thing is to, again, building on what Siobhan said, to kind of look up. Let's suppose you've identified. I mean, one that I have pitched for and sometimes succeeded, sometimes failed, is The Guardian. So I get to know that it's good to kind of get a sense of what they're publishing, partly because they change a lot, as we know. Sometimes they have a sort of progressive mood or progressive editor. It's very, like in many publications, but maybe particularly The Guardian, it's quite dependent on who the section editor is. And so get to know that. I mean, it's part of your, you know, as it were, profession, or your kind of tools as a writer. You need to know both in the sense of what they publish, also try and get to know them. I mean, wouldn't overemphasize this, but use your networks, you know, go to any of their meetings and sort of public events and get to know their atmosphere, who's likely to be sympathetic to your kind of writing. And then apply all the kind of tips and rules that Siobhan said, this idea of something very quick, just to attract their attention, really. Or these people are incredibly busy, editors always are, and so you need an initial line and then a quick summary that'll make them say, yes, that's just what we want. So make it very, very succinct and in a sense, not necessarily hugely topical, but relating to what they've been publishing, or, I mean, it depends whether it's an opinion piece or it's a topical piece. And then maybe also very succinctly mention any strength or experience of yours, so that if you're very much at the front line of organising precarious workers and there's a kind of dispute or a debate about union rights in the kind of in the precarious sectors, just mention that, you know, let's say it's Amar, you know, you're actually at the front line of organising workers in the hotel or the entertainment or Amazon or whatever it is, so that there's something very vivid. And then I think a key thing is not, as Siobhan's really emphasised, and I just emphasise it again, not writing a full piece, or just without, you know, finding out whether they're interested. Siobhan encouraged me to give you an example of a failed pitch, because I just sent them, you know, a fully done article. It was on the idea, which, you know, I thought, again, this is me being overconfident. I thought, this is fascinating. Well, if you think it's fascinating, fine, but not other people won't necessarily, particularly other editors. So I did a piece on the conversion of airplanes to ventilators, which you'd have thought was quite interesting in the time of COVID, the early days. And I was really keen on the fact that the unions on the shop floor played a crucial role in that process. You know, it was the detail of, you know, the health and safety reps and all this. Anyway, I pitched, I sent a quick pitch, and she was friendly and sort of responsive to the idea, but instead of me saying, are you interested in the trade union angle, I should have said, you know, something like, this is what I'd like to do something about. What angle do you think is interesting? Instead, I sent her the whole thing with all the detail of the trade unions. And I'd not really been following how The Guardian has stopped really writing about trade unions. They think of the unions as rather boring. So I just got a note back, you know, friendly again, but saying, sorry, there was too much detail about trade unions. I mean, for me, the whole point was the trade unions. But so this is just a lesson that if you've got a piece you think's really good, even if you've done a lot of work on it, don't assume they think it's good. Always find out very succinctly, you know, what are you interested in? So I think
Hilary, I was going to add onto that. For that particular piece, it is a lot about the unions, but even when it developed, it became a lot more about kind of climate change and the future of transitioning in industry from kind of the kind of fossil fuel economy that we have now to a green economy. So it actually was a story that had and the way that you wrote it had different potential angles. So it could have been about the unions and the nuts and bolts of how they went through that process, but it was also, and ultimately ended up being a more opinion piece about, isn't this a great example that we can be inspired by for the future as we look towards transitioning to a kind of Green New Deal.
Yes, yes. So that's, in a way, yeah, always say, do you think this angle or do you think that angle? So you're already engaging them in a sort of, you know, in thinking about it and giving them some scope. So I think I'll probably stop and hand over to Anya or Amar. They're happy to answer questions.
Great, yeah. And Anya, Amar, do you want to give us a few key insights from your own experiences before we break into groups?
Yeah, so I guess, you know, having pitched a lot freelance and now being an editor and kind of on the other side, one thing I'd say is do be patient when it comes to actually deciding to send a pitch out. So one thing that I was always really guilty of is I'd have an idea, do a lot of research, get really into it, just send off a pitch like midway through my research, didn't quite have an angle, wasn't quite certain on the detail, and was quite messy, and then wouldn't hear back because it didn't look cohesive. So just be patient, like with yourself, and make sure that you've done the research and the necessary work before you send a pitch, especially because, you know, there can be really tight turnarounds. The other thing I'd say is
will go under because of the depressed economic environment. Others are saying,
oh right, I thought that was, wow. Yeah, and the other thing I'd say is, you know, just as long as you keep it concise. I used to kind of agonize about every single comma and every single word that you put into a pitch, but like, as long as it's easy to understand and it makes sense, that's the important thing. Yeah, and the last thing is try not to burn bridges as well. There will be editors that just mess you around a bit or cancel last minute, or you'll have to chase payments sometimes because people are like that, sadly. And be careful not to burn bridges, because sometimes it can come back to bite you.
Great, and Anya, there were great tips there. And Anya, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think really to echo what Amar said about kind of wording of emails. I'm someone who definitely agonizes about that kind of thing a lot, kind of how I phrase things, and kind of, yeah, I think wanting to seem, even if I'm just pitching something, wanting to seem really articulate and really on it, and kind of, yeah, like say something really detailed. But I think, yeah, being on the other side of it as an editor has made me realize that kind of pitches like that can come off as quite dense, and it's like you want to kind of get to the heart of what the person's really writing about. And I think, yeah, I think like bullet points can be really clear in that way. I'm sort of more of a long paragraph type person, but I think, yeah, I've realized that can be a lot harder to really understand, to really get your head around as an editor. And yeah, the other thing I would say is kind of similar to what Siobhan was saying earlier on, but yeah, I'm very much in the habit of writing a whole piece and then becoming kind of very attached to it and kind of seeing it as my baby, and then sending it to places and kind of, yeah, not kind of reacting the best when I've realized it's kind of been cut quite a lot. And I don't know, you are going to have, yeah, like sometimes, like if you send something that's too long or like not in the style of a place, I feel like, yeah, you just have to be prepared for it to be cut quite brutally in some ways. But yeah, I think that's why, to avoid sort of feeling attached to it in that way, that is why it is kind of a better thing to just send more ideas rather than then sort of work on it as you go along, which I haven't really tried doing. But yeah, I think that's a really interesting approach that maybe we could all learn from a bit. So yeah.
Great, thanks so much. We've maybe been giving a little bit of a negative, or like, not depressing, but we want to be positive as well and say that yes, that you might throw out lots of ideas that aren't getting responses, that aren't picked up, but that's okay. You can pitch to multiple places, but you want to, if you get a rejection from one place, you can pitch elsewhere, but definitely take that time to rethink what fit it might have in that new destination, in that new place. I think as Ananya was saying there, as editors, you don't want to be a horrible editor, right? You don't want to pull people's work apart, and it's maybe a productive way to think about that is it's much easier to have that conversation about what direction are we going in when you're basing it on a paragraph rather than basing it on a whole piece, a whole finished piece, because it can kind of take the pain away by preventing you going off in one direction and having and being pulled back, not having to be pulled back, but being pulled back by an editor. But I'd certainly say that at Red Pepper we want to make sure that writers are getting their best work out, and we try not to be punitive or bridge burning ourselves. We have completely bombarded you with information for this first half hour, but now we're going to kind of slow things down a little bit and kind of turn the tables a little bit so that you're going to be more in charge. And I'll talk you through how that's going to look. So for the rest of the session, we are going to follow this schedule here. So we're going to take 5 minutes. I've asked people who signed up should have received an email saying could they come with a 100-word approximately pitch or an idea. It doesn't have to be a fully fledged pitch. It could just be bullet points. So you're going to get 5 minutes to write or to revise your pitch, maybe based on what you've heard. Then we'll come together into small groups for feedback and discussion about people's pitches. So you'll all get 5 minutes to work on it, then 5 minutes to discuss with fellow participants. And then we'll take 5 minutes to, based on that feedback, to make so many refinements and to kind of note down your next steps or your plans of action. Go back into those small groups, again, kind of do those final refinements, and then hopefully we'll come back and have time for a Q&A and to kind of clean up any loose ends. So if you get your pens ready, or your pencils ready, or you're probably typing's best, get your fingers ready and write that pitch. Okay, that's time's up for writing that down. Don't worry, it doesn't have to be perfect. As I said, it can be just ideas that you're going to flesh out. So we're going to break into groups in just a moment. If I can move my... I seem to have lost my ability to... Okay. Sorry. So we're going to move into groups. Each group will have 4 people. And this is what we're going to ask you to do in these groups. So one at a time, each person should share what they've written. You can do that verbally, or you can put it in the chat. I'll put this description to each group as well, so don't worry about taking notes right now. But you want to listen from the perspective of a potential editor. So put yourself in the editor's shoes and ask yourself, do you have a strong sense of what this article is about? How do you feel about it? Are you excited by it? Does it sound something new to you, something you've heard before? Is there any information or detail that's missing? So at the end of it, have you got any questions? Like, well, what's that question that was unanswered? Knowing that is really, really useful. So tell your fellow group members what's the missing info that you would love to hear. And then maybe suggest some potential different directions or possible different angles that the author can take. Now, these just have to be suggestions. They can be really out there. They can be really simple tweaks. They're just ideas, and the idea is to kind of get the conversation going about all the possibilities that this idea or the different directions it could go in.
I have a question, but I don't know how relevant it is because I'm a newbie and I don't know how much of a newbie everyone else is. But where you mentioned introducing yourself in your pitch, a lot of the examples that I've seen are introducing yourself as a writer that has already had publications or bylines in X publication. How do you introduce yourself and show that you're the person to write this article when you haven't got a previous portfolio and you're just starting out?
I think that's a great question. I would say whatever you feel is making you a good person to write this article, to lead with that. And so it could be that you're a scholar. From my perspective, I'm an academic, so I would usually say I'm a scholar in this area. Or you could be a member of an organisation or a group. There's lots of different types of experience, but I would ask yourself the question, why should I be the person writing this? And try and answer it in that way for the editor. I don't know if anyone else has got any feedback on that.
Yeah, I don't mind jumping in. Oh, sorry.
No, go on.
Okay. Oh yeah, no, just because yeah, I know like some of the pitches that I heard about were more kind of relating to personal stories, and yeah, I just wanted to add that I personally feel like if that your reason for writing it could also be something more personal about your experience, and that it's okay to kind of milk that a bit, as it were, to kind of say that this is why you're sort of passionate about this thing, and as long as you kind of have the necessary knowledge on it as well, I guess.
I was also just going to say, I hope not too controversially, that like you might not be published in and like official sounding publication, but if you've written for a uni paper or magazine, if you did work experience and got a byline in a local paper, like you can describe yourself as like a budding journalist or a writer who's just starting out, and who's been published locally or at uni. You can big that stuff up really. And as long as you can kind of back it up with the work and the skills, I think you can be a little bit creative within reason.
Yeah, and on that, I mean, I don't want to discourage anyone from aiming high with their first pitches, but there's a lot of outlets out there, and so if you're worried that you haven't got enough experience, then aim for those outlets that maybe are not looking so much for the impressive bylines, to get your feet under the table and to give you a bit of experience. It's also useful just to get that writing experience anyway, to work with an editor with maybe a less pressurized environment.
Yeah, I don't want to sound like kind of any shade towards editors or anything, but I also think like, I don't know, like for anyone that just gets kind of negative feedback from editor, or they're not kind of supportive, like you should see it as their loss as well. Like if they're not kind of encouraging you in your writing or trying to kind of steer you forward, but just sort of pushing you back, like I think if they're not kind of helping your writing to get better, or is kind of one thing to say like, we wouldn't necessarily take this in this format, but if they're just kind of short with you or brief with you, then I don't know, you deserve better than that as a writer. So just some motivational words, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Be confident. Yeah. So that's us at 2:00. I'll just say thank you so much for making the time to join us. You can find out more about Red Pepper at redpepper.org.uk. Please explore the website. If you're not a subscriber already, of course, we encourage you to be one. But you can also donate to us and tell your friends about us. Follow us on Twitter and all that jazz, and we'll follow up with information in an email. It's been lovely to see you, and thank you for spending your lunch hour with us today.
View the full TWT20 program and become a supporter today to help us deliver political education all year round at theworldtransformed.org.